In the previous episode, we discussed how financial assets facilitate trade deficits and surpluses. We showed that, because financial assets are durable, they allow agents to store output, even when the output itself, like beer and cheese, is not inherently storable. When agents want to save output, they run a trade surplus and accumulate financial assets that can be used to purchase output in the future. And when agents want to consume more output than they produce, they run a trade deficit and spend their financial assets, if they have any, or issue IOUs in the event they do not have any financial assets. In the current episode, we answer the question, why would anyone want to run a trade deficit or a trade surplus? Or more to the point, under what conditions would someone want to run a trade deficit or a trade surplus? In this episode, we show that trade deficits and surpluses are always related to storage. We also define the concepts of a current account and a capital account, and show how these concepts are related to trade deficits and surpluses. Let's start with an idea. Trade deficits and surpluses will occur whenever there are differences in the prices people are willing to pay for storage. What exactly does this mean? We start by working through two simple examples that show how trade deficits and surpluses naturally occur and are an essential part of a modern society. In addition, there is nothing inherently good or bad about either trade deficits or trade surpluses. In our example, trade deficits and surpluses will occur for natural reasons. For our first example, consider a situation in which output, say some sort of food like cheese, is completely perishable. That is, the food is not storable at all. It quickly rots away, especially if there aren't any refrigerators and you leave it out for 2 weeks. But a storable financial asset like money is available to society. Continuing our example, in our stylized environment, people live for 2 periods of life, call them young and old. When people are young, they are employed in work, and when they are old, they are retired and do not work. Further, when people are young and working, they need to save for retirement. They cannot directly store their output. For example, they can't stack wedges of cheese, since we have assumed cheese is not storable. So instead, the young produce more than they can consume, and they exchange their surplus production with the current generation of the old for money belonging to the old. This money is an asset which they can store. In this instance, the young run a trade surplus. Then, when the young become old and are retired and have stopped working, they, in turn, can trade their stored money for the current generation of young people's surplus production of cheese, which they can eat. Thus, the older generation, our retirees, run a trade deficit. In this simple example, the financial asset, which is money, facilitates the saving for retirement of the young and the consumption while retired of the old. Both the young and the old are better off by having the ability to run trade surpluses and deficits. The availability of a durable financial asset like money actually allows for saving in a world where output is perishable and cannot be saved. In this example, the old have no interest in continued saving since they are retired and have no income to save. For this reason, we say that the old one's willingness to pay for storage is low. In contrast, the young would like to save for retirement. Their willingness to pay for storage is high. These differences in the willingness to pay for storage of the young and the old leads to trading opportunities. The young accept or run a trade surplus with the old. They provide the old with products for consumption and take from the old financial assets in return. And the old run a trade deficit with the young. They take products for consumption from the young and give to the young financial assets as payment. Let's look at a second example to illustrate how trade deficits and surpluses naturally arise, this one concerning food and growing seasons. Imagine there are 2 countries. We'll call them North and South. They each grow food at different times of the year, and assume that, as in the earlier example, food is not storable, perhaps because there is no refrigeration. In the April to September period, food is plentiful in the north. They make 99 units, and is in very short supply in the south. They only make 1 unit. And in the October to March period, food is in short supply in the north, 1 unit, and plentiful in the south, 99 units. It seems obvious that both the north and the south would like to store some food after their growing season to help survive the lack of food in their winter. But storage is not an option. We have assumed that food is perishable, and without refrigeration, there is no mechanism for storage. Instead, the two countries can trade. In this case, trade serves the same purpose as the invention of a storage technology. Let's say that from April through September, the North can ship 49 units of food to the South. Conversely, from October through March, the South can ship 49 units of food to the North. After trade, production and consumption of food would follow the table illustrated here. This table shows that residents of both North and South are better off after trade. Before trade, residents have almost too much food during the growing season and very little food during the winter months. After trade, they enjoy an even diet of food throughout the year, which we assume is their desired pattern of food consumption. Recall that most trade is done by individual actors, not governments, and the individual actors in the North and the South will need to keep records of who shipped what to whom and when. To illustrate, let's suppose this trading activity starts in the April through September period of one particular year. The residents of the North will only ship 49 units of food to the residents of the South in exchange for an IOU from the residents in the South for 49 units of food at some point in the future. In the olden days, these payments were made in gold or some other precious commodity that satisfied the 4 properties of financial assets we identified earlier. Gold and silver, in short, were the money of the time. In more modern times, the IOU can be in the form of fiat currency or even a private contract. Using the parlance of economics, the accounting of the exchange of goods and services for financial assets between North and South would look like the table illustrated here. Focusing on the period April through September, the North ran what is called a current account surplus because it was a net exporter of food to the South. It exported 49 units of food. In exchange for the 49 units of food, the North received an IOU from the South worth 49 units. Again, using the language of economists, we say the North ran a capital account deficit during that same period since it received an IOU worth 49 units of food and was thus a net importer of currency. In the exact same time period, the South ran a current account deficit of 49 units of food, since it imported that food from the North, and a capital account surplus of 49 IOUs for food, since it exported or gave those IOUs to the North in exchange for the food. Notice that the current account and the capital account add up or sum to 0 for each country. This is accounting. If the North sells 49 units of food to the South, it must receive an IOU for 49 units of food in return. Thus, the North is plus 49 on the current account and minus 49 on the capital account. Likewise, if the South receives 49 units of food in exchange for an IOU of 49 units of food, the South is minus 49 on the current account and plus 49 on the capital account. In the first few videos, when we were discussing beer and cheese and Dean and Randy, we showed that whenever there are differences in internal prices, opportunities for trade emerge. Here, we see that the North and the South both would like to trade. So based on what we learned earlier, there must be a difference in at least one price. It turns out the relevant price here is related to the price of storage. Since within-country storage doesn't exist in this very simple example, and therefore there is no explicit price for within-country storage, the price relevant for trading opportunities is what people would be willing to pay for storage if such a storage technology existed. In April through September, the North has a high willingness to pay for storage. They currently have a lot of food and they know that in 6 months' time they will not have much food, so they would be willing to pay a lot to be able to store some of that. In contrast, at exactly the same time, the South has almost no food, and they know in 6 months' time they will produce a lot of food. Therefore, they have no desire to pay to store food at that time. Thus, what makes trade possible in the April to September period is that the North is willing to pay a lot to store food, and the South is not willing to pay much, if anything at all, for storage opportunity. In the October to March period, roles are reversed. The North is not producing much food and is not willing to pay for storage. The South is producing lots of food and is willing to pay a lot to store some of it for future use, that is, if a storage technology existed. These differences in willingness to pay for storage generate the trading opportunities. So, to recap, in this video we showed that trade deficits and surpluses are an essential and integral part of modern society, since they allow people to trade output over time, even when output is not storable. People run trade deficits when they want to consume more than they produce, and they run trade surpluses when they want to produce more than they consume. In the two simple examples we covered, trade deficits and trade surpluses occur when people differ in their willingness to pay for storage. In the next episode, we'll work through a formal example that shows how differences in interest rates lead to trade deficits and surpluses, as well as demonstrate how the interest rate is directly related to the price of storing output over time.